Hi, you're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, the most amazing film that has ever been made. So I put a piece online a while back about how this was destined to be a 6 out of 10, primarily due to the lightweight casting. I'll get to that in a bit. Now, when I say it's the greatest film of all time, it isn't. So Christopher Nolan had he's had one of the great runs. He's up there with the likes of probably Tarantino, David Fincher, Villeneuve, Paul Thomas Anderson as one of the more preeminent directors of broadly mainstream movies. He made his name in the first decade of the century with the triumphant Monumental art house film, but then with big budget widescreen films that he's become known for, such as the Dark Knight films, the Batman trilogy, but also, The Prestige was outstanding, and the Inception. I felt like he went on a decline after Inception because I really rate The Dark Knight Rises, but it's not quite there. Interstellar, a lot of people overrate that, I feel. It's not all the way there, but it's still, it's still an outstanding film. Dunkirk, I thought, was a noble failure. I didn't think it worked, but I really appreciated that someone in his position would choose such a subject and deliver such a different film to what stylistically he'd made up until that point. So then we got Tenet, which was just, I rated it as my worst film of that year. And what a bounce back, because Oppenheimer came out as part of the Barbie phenomenon, did $1 billion for a scientific biopic, but it was an outstanding film and I gave it my film of the year. So he went from number one worst to number one best. So if anyone thinks that I'm bagging this guy with this review, I have literally given his previous film my film of the year. Oppenheimer was fantastic, really well acted and scripted, screenplayed, everything about it was high class. And when he announced that The Odyssey was his next project, I was super, super excited. And that dissipated as soon as he announced the cast. So I have a massive problem with the cast of this film. Yet it isn't the problem that everyone else has, which is race swapping and gender swapping and God knows. The usual things. But mine isn't. Mine is a historical drama, whether it's fantasy or not, is a natural domain of more heavyweight actors that have gravity. Troy becomes a reference point for this movie. Flawed film, yes. I've watched it quite a few times. I like it. It is flawed. But they put a lot of heavyweight actors in that film. And when I saw the cast being announced one by one for The Odyssey, I was like, it's basically, why not just get the throuple that is Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya and Tom Holland, who are in every movie for some reason, despite at least two of them not seemingly being any good at acting. I felt like that would make the tone of the film. I don't mind if it's populist, but I felt like none of the actors had any gravity. Even Matt Damon said before, he's the Rolls Royce of lightweight actors. I'll watch anything with Matt Damon in. But do I think he's an outstanding actor with a lot of gravity? I think he's getting there a little bit, but overall he's the Rolls Royce of lightweight populism. And he was Odysseus. The start of Homer's 3,000-year-old novel, The Odyssey. So Troy becomes a reference point because the two works most associated with the Greek poet Homer from around the 8th century BC is the Iliad, which is a much smaller tale about the Trojan War, which focused on a few finite actions in that 10-year war after the Greeks had gone to Troy to get back Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, from Paris, who had stolen her, or she'd gone willingly. I think she was a slave anyway, where she was, pretty much. But a lot of this was infused with the fate of the gods, so they didn't really have much of free will. It was like a lot of this stuff was defined by the gods. So that the Iliad was basically the battle between Achilles and Paris. It was around that part of the Trojan War, and after the Trojan War, one of the top generals in the Greek army went home via ship and was waylaid for many years due to the actions of the gods. One thing I did like about this is that they make out that the Trojan horse itself was an affront to the gods, because it was abusing the Zeus's law on hospitality. I did like that. I really hate comic book fans saying, I prefer this comic book movie because the suit is more accurate. I don't give a shit about any of that at all. I care whether it's good or bad. So here we get the waylaid Odysseus and his 12 or so ships on their journey back to Ithaca, where he lives, and crucially, and in a great bit of dramatic writing by Homer, where his wife has been delaying choosing a new suitor. There's something like 100 suitors hanging around her castle all day long, boozing and drinking and eating hogs and behaving like animals, waiting for her to choose a new suitor to be king of Ithaca. I think it's Ithaca. And she keeps, she works a loom, and she unravels. She says, once this has been finished, I will choose a new suitor, and every night she unravels it. Which is one of the big problems of the film, is that there's so much exposition of those moments. Instead of telling the story, the characters just speak it, and then it's gone again. It's like when Robert Pattinson says it to her, it's just like, I know you're undoing that. And it's like, well, thanks for that in-depth storytelling there. Thanks, Christopher. Now, on his way home, Odysseus has several encounters which waylay him, and they're all symbolic and rich in meaning, and have been exhaustively looked over for many, many years, all the way through to James Joyce taking this Odyssey and turning it into the novel Ulysses, which reversed the epic scale and made a couple of people walking around Dublin into this vast Homeric Odyssey. So I've got an awful lot of problems with this film. I went and saw it yesterday, and I was very, very surprised. I did think that it would be populist trash, but hugely enjoyable, with a lot of visual elements and poetic imagery that would sustain it. And that's from the reviews I've seen, which are incredibly over-the-top positive, both from audiences and from critics. I don't care. I'm only reviewing based on my own opinion. I don't care if it gets 100% audience score and critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. In fact, I think Rotten Tomatoes is really hurting itself with the way that some of these films are coming out and getting such wall-to-wall acclaim. A lot of people talking about conspiracy theories where negative reviews don't get published, but that's something for another day. Now, when I saw the trailer, I thought my problems with the casting were absolutely spot on, because the tone, the script, and the acting were dreadful. So I thought, well, trailers never lie, and maybe that is not going to be a great film, but maybe it's still going to be a visually dazzling film and emotionally satisfying film. But I didn't think that was the case. In fact, I'm confused, because I don't have that wild a taste in movies to be that far away from every other critic, or at least 9 out of 10 critics. As usual with a Christopher Nolan film, this film opens basically with somebody beating you over the head with pots and pans, like the deafening loudness. And the first half an hour of the film is just Telemachus walking around looking like a teenage boy. And yeah, it's a long time before we actually get to the Odyssey and the wanderings. And I kind of got the gist of the fact that Telemachus, who is Odysseus' son, and Penelope, who is Odysseus' wife, they've been waiting for him for 20 years, as has a dog. I understood that part of the story. I didn't feel like I needed to wander around in it as much as I did. And I think the individual components of Odysseus's wanderings in a 3-hour film should have made up at least twice as much of it, probably 3 times as much of it. Why do they feel so truncated and rushed? So this is my thoughts on the movie. Number one problem with it is the script. It's really bad. It's really cringe-inducingly bad. These are the same writers that did Oppenheimer, where every single scene was better than any scene in this film, where the dialogue in every scene was better than the dialogue in any scene in this film. There are moments of pure cringe dialogue. Often, throughout, virtually the whole film, you're looking for someone to say something profound, and that really does have an impact on the acting. So there are actors out there that can be brilliant in really poorly written films, and I think that writing extends to the screenplay, which does make sense in some way on paper, but like I said, I wouldn't have minded of spending... They should have fleshed out each of the vignettes that Odysseus goes through. So he goes to Cyclops first in this film, and I thought this, people are raving about the visual effects on this film. I thought the Cyclops character was a bit cheesy CGI, a bit like something out of the Hobbit movies 15 years ago. And this is the thing, the main part of the Cyclops encounter was Odysseus saying that he was, after he blinded Cyclops, who was the son of Poseidon, leading to Ulysses, or Odysseus is dependent on which era you're calling him from. Ulysses and Odysseus are the same person, which led to Poseidon cursing Odysseus' journey home because Cyclops was the son of Poseidon. But Ulysses tells him his name is no one. So when other people come to help Cyclops, they ask him who's attacked him, and he says no one. And it's the most important part of that story. And they just leave it out. And the Lestrygonians, what the hell is going on there? One of the most important elements of that story is how the Lestrygonians rain down giant boulders on Odysseus' ship, sinking 11 of the 12. Here we get a couple of boats on shore. That whole bit with the Lestrygonians. They pull up on a beach, they walk into a forest, they stay there for about a minute, they're chased off by giants who bash up a couple of their boats. That's nowhere near as cinematic as the story. I read the story when I was a teenager, and every single element was more cinematic than this film. Why didn't he use the elements from the story that were cinematic, that added to these very truncated, rushed sequences? That might as well not have happened. Forget about the sirens. At least they tied Matt Damon down to a mast, but other than that, it might as well not have happened. And the whirlpool and Skylar, that bit was just the whirlpool wasn't much. I felt like the sea in this, he's so known for practical effects, and he obviously shot this at sea, but you've got the boat being bashed around with the people on it, and you pull back to the sea, and it looks kind of nice and blue. It was really jarring. It didn't really make sense. The sea never seemed that rough, but then they're on the boat being bashed by everything going on, and they pull back and it's all quite calm, actually. But the whirlpool wasn't that great. That's something that you would expect him to be able to deliver a terrifying thing, and it just wasn't terrifying, and they get by it really easily. And then Skylar comes out, and nothing happens. He eats a couple of people and they drift off again. Nothing seems to have any development or weight around those individual encounters. It seems to be really focused on what's happening with Telemachus. The only ones that work, I thought, were Circe, the witch. Samantha Morton might be best on show here. I'll go through the cast. So the Circe thing where she turns them all into pigs, which is very much like Spirited Away, the movie. And that bit was great, and Samantha Morton was really great, and also Calypso. That bit was quite cool as well, because it had the dreamlike quality that he might have been there eating his lotus leaves for many years, and it was all a dream state, and no one knew what was reality, and I thought that was quite well done. But the Oxen of the Sun bit, where the crew eat the gods' cows, why did I have the impression that these were magnificent beasts and you get a couple of like small brown cows in the distance. Yes, I understand perspective, Father Ted fans. So the cast is really impact. I thought the cast were lightweight people in general, often, that I wouldn't expect a great performance out of. But it's worse than that. So I thought Matt Damon was fine as Odysseus. Looking back at Oppenheimer, I wonder how much better Cillian Murphy would have been as Odysseus. But he's fine, and he survives the poor dialogue better than most. In general, this film is much, much worse the half of the film where he's not on screen. When he's on screen, it's usually the better moments. Tom Holland is absolutely worst in show. As Odysseus' son, Telemachus, he's dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. He plays it like Peter Parker. And I've honestly yet to be convinced that he's a good actor. In anything. I saw him in that Southern Potboiler. That's the best I've seen him in anything. He was decent in that. Playing a different character. But here he plays Spider-Man. And he's dreadful. And all of his whole story arc is just rubbish. Anne Hathaway's a great actor, but they denuded Penelope of most of her meaning and sophistication and the balancing act she's doing. It's like everyone knows everything already. And I thought they underwrote her characters to the point where it just doesn't matter. Robert Pattinson's good in everything, but he's as the guy that's the leader of the suitors here, I just didn't really... He was one of the best in it, but it was also non-event. Lupita is the one that caused the most problems by being a Black Helen of Troy. I would say this, like, she's one of the most heavyweight actors in the whole thing, and, you know, not Oscar-winning actor. But her whole thing with John Bernthal as she is Helen of Troy, who's, you know, disfigured. I thought that was a complete mess. I didn't buy either character, and they were just like spouting stuff. I didn't think it worked. It was like she had this totally different tone to the movie. I don't care about the race swapping angle here. The fact is that the characters and their addition to the story were a total mess, tonally and everything. Just didn't really fit with what was going on. It was like, what do you want me to do with this information? Samantha Morton, probably the best in show as Cersei. John Leguizamo isn't bad, but he comes across like the blind guy, the martial arts superhero guy in Rogue One. It's just that character again. There's nothing really wrong with it. But I wouldn't have minded them grounding these characters with a bit more gravity. But then the dialogue is so trite that they can't. Charlize Theron's fine as Calypso. She gave off the air that they might have been there forever and that time didn't really matter. When you're stuck on a beach with Charlize Theron eating lobster and taking heroin. Elliot Page, like, people are saying she was great, or he was... Did it already? Elliot Page, people saying he was great. And Pitchfork magazine said the best performance in the film. What a load of crap. He is in the film for probably 2 1.5 minute bursts. You can't say. Really fine in those 1.5 minute bursts, but definitely not an interesting character. Agamemnon is played by Benny Safdie, who I assume is a Safdie film director, but you never really see him. Travis Scott as a bard is rubbish. I thought that was a bit cringe. It made me think of the Matrix films when they go down to the middle of the earth and they've got these wild multiracial parties happening, and everyone hated those moments. It just didn't fit. Nothing to do with what he looked like. It was just a bit cheesy. So yeah, the cast was pretty bad in general. I didn't really have any problem with Matt Damon. The screenplay it felt like it wandered, but why didn't you give more weight to the symbolism and the metaphor of Odysseus' journey rather than just having these very truncated versions of the pivotal moments in the story? And even like the character of Penelope wasn't developed. And Mia Goth is in it, completely wasted, as just a non-event in the background. And I always remember the Odysseus killing all of the suitors, like 100 people, was just grotesque. Whereas here they try and make him out to be a hero. And he executes the disloyal maidservants as well, hangs them all. Like he's not a hero. He's the only one that returns, and he's certainly not a hero. But they make him out to be this kind of whiter than white hero a bit. They like get a bit of dirt on his shoes, and that's about it. And that didn't really land. I thought that whole action sequence at the end. And this is a film that, like, 3 hours, and I finished it. When it was finishing, I felt nothing. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel emotionally involved. And I think, crucially, I can watch a flawed film like Troy over and over. And, you know, maybe a few years apart. But I don't see any rewatch value in this film. It doesn't seem to have compelling sequences that you would forgive other elements of the film for. And, like, it's not like the cast or the dialogue or the individual sequences make up for it. I don't understand this praising of its visual majesty. I didn't really get that at all. There were bits that were nicely shot and, you know, well helmed, but there also stuff that wasn't that memorable. It just felt really hollow. It felt like it didn't really add up to anything or mean anything. I mean, I'm glad that it's done really, really well at the box office, but seeing people out there in this mass hysteria where they're all glazing the film as a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, I haven't seen this since the Dune films, where people were saying that Dune 1 and 2 were the equivalent of The Godfather 1 and 2. It's like I'm objectively looking at this film and everyone else telling me how great it is, and it's clearly not. And I don't care if you love it. You've got bad taste, or you're being disingenuous, or you're lying to yourself because you want it to be great. And then all of the attention online is whether you care about a black person or a trans person in the role. Now, I care that everyone's a lightweight actor with a terrible script, and anything that could have added to the story seems to have been cut off when we've got plenty of time to watch a really bad Tom Holland wander around and an Anne Hathaway that is just cut off at the knees as far as subtlety and complexity go. And we know all about that whole thing, and it gets old. And I would rather have seen, like, the Odyssey itself. So, yeah, I thought this was a pretty bad film. I thought the worst that could happen here is that it would have been a 7 out of 10, and I would have been wrong. But I was wrong giving it a 6 out of 10, because the Odyssey is rubbish. And I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. The same score I think I gave Tenet, which is shocking.